Do you ever feel as if you were in your own way? You keep rehashing the same old story in your head, or maybe you say you want to do something in your life, but you just don't get there because there's too much you need to do first. My guest today is Cory Allen. Cory is a mentor, author, and music producer. He caught my attention with his latest book, Brave New You, a roadmap to believing more is possible. In it, he calls out what gets in our way and how to face our obstacles. He identifies the tools we need to be our best self and make change, from mindful communication to the danger of making assumptions and even choosing the people in our life carefully. He joins me now with practical tools to live our best life and disrupt the norm.
Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, Cory, how are you?
I'm great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No, thanks for being here today. Are you living your best life?
I am. I mean, if I'm alive, I'm living my best life, and I think to give it a little bit more substance, like, I think it's all perspective, for me. So even whenever things aren't going well, I am engaging with them in such a way where I understand that they're temporary, and I'm grateful and appreciate the fact that I'm in this experience in this moment and get to move through these temporary negative things.
Well, you certainly have quite a following now, and you've come out with a book, and I know you're doing the rounds to talk about all this messaging. What goes through your mind 10 seconds to air?
Always is levitate the audience. Levitate the audience. And so what that means to me is if someone is listening to me on a podcast, if someone is even going to read something I've written, whatever it may be, I want them to feel connected. I want them to feel present. I want them to feel like they're thinking differently, like they're disrupting the kind of autopilot thinking and ways of being that they're in that moment, and stopping, becoming more self-aware, and beginning to feel this feeling of richness, that feeling whenever you come to the present, whenever you start waking up, when you start thinking about yourself and the world and your life, it has this sense of sort of like floatingness to it, to levitation, to something great, this gravity. And I always remember to bring that energy whenever I go and do anything.
Where did you get started with this work?
Yeah, I mean, it's been my entire life. It really came from having a challenging environment whenever I was a kid. And, I'm 42, so in the 90s, I was really just totally by chance. There was no books in my house. There were no readers, nothing like that. Maybe there's a National Enquirer laying around. That was about it. And I just completely randomly one day, whenever I was a kid, or a teenager, I should say, I heard someone in public say, if you could have dinner with two people, who would they be? And they said Nietzsche and Jesus. And which is an interesting combination.
Yeah.
And later, I was in a bookstore several years later. I randomly saw Nietzsche's name on the back of the book, went and checked that out. That took me into Western philosophy because it totally blew my mind, and I felt really contained and connected to that way of thinking. Is because I think in really kind of abstract ways. They get funneled down to more precise ways. And that was the first time I'd seen that replicated in life. And so after I blasted through all the Western philosophy, I moved over to Eastern philosophy, and I found just kind of randomly, this is, of course, some of your listeners will remember this, like back in the day before there was Google, before there was YouTube, and also, Eastern wisdom traditions, meditation, mindfulness, all this stuff was so much more fringe at that point. There wasn't,
Right.
Here's 10 ways to meditate to be better at work or whatever. None of that stuff existed. It was dusty old books that were badly translated and stuff. So I just randomly found one of those and picked it up, and it looked cool. And that started my whole entry point into teaching myself Eastern wisdom traditions. And from there, I just really made it a total focal point of my life.
And so you're self-taught, but then you decided to share that with the public. which now now getting to the public is not so difficult as it was back in the 90s. So now you've found this whole new platform and now you're sharing it. What's the entry point for people today, do you feel like? Where do you want to touch them right from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really helping someone recognize that the way that they are thinking affects the way that they see the world. And the way that they see the world affects how they feel, and that's going to affect how they act in the world. And if you start to recognize that, a whole bunch of stuff opens for you.
So let's back up to that again. So the way you're thinking affects the way you see the world. Is that what you said? Okay.
Right.
And then the way you see the world, what was the second part of that?
Affects how you feel.
How you feel. So for example.
Yeah, for example, if you are, let's say you are going to go to like a social event and you are thinking negatively about yourself. You get into this sense of anxiety, of worry, of projecting this narrative in this story that, oh, no one there's going to like me. It's going to be weird. I'm not going to know anybody. Then the world will start to appear that way to you. So if you go to the social event, because you're in this, negative thinking pattern, you're going to start seeing that in people. Just because whether they're acting that way or not, you're going to project that way of thinking onto these people. And because of that, it's therefore going to make you start reacting to the way that you're perceiving these people. So you're going to go, oh, there they are. They're weird. They don't like me. They're staying away from me. And then you get jammed up and clammy and awkward. But then, and this is something I touch on in the book, this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, then because you're doing that, people do actually start treating you weird because you're being awkward. You're being the thing, you know what I mean, that you were worried about. And so it's really valuable how we can disrupt that is by learning to pay attention to what's arising in our mind, noticing those thoughts whenever we have them in the present, and then being able to separate them, recognize the story, disrupt that, and go, okay, let's look at what's really here. What's in reality?
Right.
I'm a person about to go to a dinner party. That's all that's happening. Like, I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know what the energy is. I'm me. This is cool. Let's go there. And instead of, believing the story of fear and anxiety, let's move into this with curiosity. Let's move into it with let's see what's there. What might I learn? What interesting experiences might I have? And if you approach that situation with that mindset, it appears different to you. So instead of walking and seeing those people and perceiving them as being, critical or judgmental of you or something, you go in there and you're like, wow, look at these entry points into other universes of thought and experience. How cool. Let's go engage with these people and get into a conversation. And now what's happening is you're materializing this sense of self where they go, wow, look at this person. They want to come talk to me. They're so interesting. They're engaged. They're connecting to me. And then you become magnetic. So that's one of a million ways in which that can unfold.
You just mentioned a couple of key words there: mindset, curiosity, perspective. Let's start with mindset. How do you define mindset?
Yeah, it's the way in which you're thinking and how it is affecting what you experience. So a classic example would be, this isn't happening, or this is happening to me. And then you say, no, let's reframe that. This is happening for me. That would be looking at one singular event from two different perspectives. The event doesn't change, but how you think and how you approach and engage with that event does. And therefore that changes the event and what you experience.
And how is that different from perspective?
Well, I think perspective is a little bit different, and perspective is like the zoomed out view, right? So perspective is like, how am I looking at life and the contents of life? I feel like mindset is more of what we use to talk about when we're talking about action and applying and engaging with what we're experiencing.
Right. So one of the things that you talk about in the book that speaks, I think, to a lot of us is this story that we tell ourselves. A lot of stories. There's a lot that happens inside our head before we even walk out the door in the morning. And we retell those stories and we retell those stories. And I would love to know how you suggest we break that. I know you get into it in the book, but for the podcast, how do we break that constant storytelling? I mean, it's almost, you call your friends, you call a relative, and it's almost as if you're having the same conversation that you've had 10 years ago. It's the conversations kind of could be the same. It's just, you don't even realize that it was 10 years have passed. You almost keep talking about the same stuff and rehashing the same stuff. True, not true. I see a little smile come on your face. You're like, yeah, that happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So how do we break that cycle of not being on that same hamster wheel in our heads? Let's start off there. Forget about what we end up doing in life. My guess is you're going to say that if it's happening in our head, we're going to end up manifesting it to put it in our life. So let's start with what's going on in our head. We relive some of the same stuff.
It's a great question. And I think that there's two different perspectives we can look at it with. One, what you're talking about is the patternation of familiarity. So we get into this groove of the people that we know, that we see often, that we've known particularly for a long time. What happens is that, and this is a really important thing or I should say, it can be really useful for someone to consider, is that like we get comfortable even if we don't like what it is. Mm-hmm. Humans are so predisposed to finding comfort and familiarity, even if it's something that they don't enjoy. They'd rather be in the known and uncomfortable than in the unknown and excited and trying to enjoy something new. So people that you get used to these social roles that you're playing, especially if it's a family member or something like that. And ultimately what happens is you kind of stop allowing yourself to evolve. You stop allowing yourself to speak to what you've kind of experienced in the last couple of years that perhaps they haven't been a part of. And so you're maintaining this relationship just out of pure habit. And so you're like, well, let's get together, talk about the same things again. Yeah. We're both sort of not really paying attention and whatever. I mean, to me, I'm like, well, why even have the conversation then, right? Because it's not very exciting. It's not very good. It's not really.
Well, habit. I think you said it. It's habit. You're used to doing that.
Yeah, it's
you pick up the phone,
habit,
you call that same person, and 9 times out of 10, you have the exact same conversation that you've had the time before.
Totally. And it's like, I mean, if we want to go deep really quickly, like it's ultimately we maintain those type of relationships out of a deep existential fear of being alone and not having anyone to talk to in life or anything like that. So we maintain these surface level relationships that just are sort of give us the illusion of connection, gives the illusion of being seen and being known, whenever really, in those type of patterned conversations, we're not really sharing like, hey, I've been thinking about dying a lot lately. I'm terrified of it. It's bothering me. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So why don't we do that? Why don't we do that?
I do that.
You do?
I mean,
okay, I'm going to call you next time.
Please. Yeah, I'd love to. I think people don't do it because, a couple of reasons. One is that like we have our idea of how other people see us in the world. Right. It's almost like I call it the sitcom reality. It's like we're all on this sitcom. And what happens is that if you start going off script, then the other actors are going to go, hold on a second. This, I don't know. Now my lines, now my lines don't work. Yeah. And everyone gets freaked out because like, you're not being who I'm expecting you to be.
Right.
So this is awkward and I don't like this. So people fear the rejection, the awkwardness, the having to kind of rebuild this sense of who other people think they are. So they just stay in this weird safe lane, which ironically is doing the exact same thing that they are scared that's going to happen.
Right.
So I would say that in those situations, what we would want to do is, I mean, it's up to the user in this situation, how dynamic, let me say it that way, they want to be with this. But I would say if you're in these patterned conversations and you find yourself kind of getting bored and just not feeling, you're not feeling connection. That's really what we're going for. You're not feeling energized. You're not feeling inspired and alive through these conversations. Start bringing in some of that stuff in a very, in a gentle way to those conversations to break up the pattern. Like I was kind of joking about the mortality thing, but yeah, I think we're all thinking about that here and there, sometimes. But you could bring that in and say like, hey, I've been really like thinking about just life lately. You start like that where we've sweetened.
I'm picturing some of the conversations that I have that are predictable, and I'm picturing me saying that, and I see the actor on the other side going, "Whoa, whoa, you just totally which sitcom are we in?" Like you just said. So I'm definitely feeling this out. Okay, so you say, "Hey, I've been thinking about this." You ever think about it?
How I sweetened it up. Exactly. Instead of saying I've been thinking about dying, you say I've been thinking about life. And so now you're getting to the thing and like, well, it's wild that we're this age now. And, this is sort of so much has happened. And so you're working your way. It's kind of like getting to the uncomfortable or the thing, as opposed to just blasting into this new territory. So that's one way to, me and my friends, we all, we like to get straight to the point. But that's a way to kind of introduce those things. And what's really fascinating about that is that whenever you like, we anticipate that other people won't be ready to receive or won't want to talk about that. But so many of these things that we all think about in life are just universal human thoughts and experiences. The reason we don't talk about them is why we just discussed. Like both of you are sitting there thinking like, I wish I could talk about mortality. And then both of you are like, well, they wouldn't like it. Both of you are thinking that, so you never talk about it. But the reality is that whenever you approach a conversation, any conversation, with a level of openness and earnesty and in a little bit of vulnerability, where you're putting yourself out there a little bit, 9 times out of 10, what happens is that shows the person that that's the kind of the context for the conversation. They feel safe then opening that part of themselves. Yeah. So they may have been wanting to talk about some deeper things or some new things, but they didn't know how to open that door. But now that you have, they go, oh, great, now I can talk about this as well. And it really does tend to, that vulnerability allows you to open up, which then allows them to open up, which allows you to have a deeper connection.
Right. You mentioned assumption. I mean, you just touched on it there. We make this huge assumption that the other person doesn't want to talk about mortality or whatever it is that we bring up. And that is dangerous to have assumptions. What do you mean by that? Why is it so dangerous to have assumptions?
Yeah, it's because we are creating a reality that doesn't exist. And generally, it's predicated upon our anxieties and fears and traumas. So an example would be like, if our partner comes home from work and we go, hey, how's it going? And they're a little rude and short and weird, and they just sort of say something, a single word and walk off. What will happen with most people, because also humans are rather self-centered and self-focused, will go, that must be about me, like they're mad at me or there's some conflict that's going on. And so then you create this story in your mind and then also, because what happens is you go, and also I'm a victim here. That was pretty rude, so right. now I'm mad, and so now there's something going on and I'm irritated.
You're talking to me.
I mean, it's just human behavior,
Yeah.
And so you're like, no, I'm a victim and I'm mad, I'm outraged. And now while I'm in this area, let me think of some things that they have done that is annoying me. So I'll have some
wow.
ammunition.
You're talking to every couple out there, right? Because someone comes home and then you think, well, don't treat me like that. Well, and it just becomes, so there is a lot of assumption that happens.
A ton, yeah. So you're building this, you're like litigating reality, like building this whole case for what's happening. And then you go in there, and so you start approaching them, your partner, with this energy, and then it creates a conflict. But let's rewind and look at kind of a Pulp Fiction approach. Let's look at the other storyline from the other perspective. So they just had a really bad day at work. They're exhausted. They didn't sleep well last night. Whoever they were working with was being really difficult. A bunch of stuff went wrong. And on the way home, they were thinking, I can't wait to get home and relax and be with my partner, because I love them, and it's going to be nice, and I'm going to feel cozy. We're going to be able to talk. I can tell them about the day. It's going to be so nice. But because they're so drained, they open the garage door and they're like, hey, And now you've created this whole story out of that, hey, whenever really it wasn't what was going on at all. And now you've got this conflict. And so, and from their perspective, what happens is that they're going like, why are they being so like aggressive to me? All I wanted to do, I wanted them to come home and receive me and like,
Right.
you know, and to be with them. And now they get mad. So it creates this whole thing that spirals. So again, that's one of just a million ways in which we make these assumptions, you know, and create problems in reality that don't really exist. And we do them about ourselves all the time too. I mean, that's a huge one. Is that, you know, say we're going into you know, a job interview or something, and we're like, yeah, this person's not going to like me. I'm terrible, whatever. We go in, and then you have that story playing in your mind, and then they make a comment, and you assume it means whatever. It assumes that it has something to do with you, and it affects your confidence and your clarity, and it becomes a real issue.
So let's rewind that. Let's rewire that so that the next time our partner comes home, or it's us that are walking in and go, hey, let's rewire that so that we can have those moments be the best that they can be. And so that we can then be the best that we want to be. How do we flip that now?
Yeah. So number one is, now that we've talked about these things, people who are listening to this are aware that that's happening. And that's really important. So now that you're aware that those arising reactive emotions and thoughts and the story that's going into your mind is just a projection, what you can do is, whenever the partner comes home from work and they're being a little short, you feel your body, you feel the emotion, the frustration, the awkwardness, maybe the fear. You notice the story, that all the projection that you're making, all the assumptions, and you as you notice all that happen, you disrupt it by going, oh, pause, slow down. Now that I know I'm just imagining all of this, let's actually engage with what's here. Let's see what's really going on. And let's do that by creating space, not believing and getting carried away with those stories and those narratives, but asking questions. Let's get to what's actually going on, instead of allowing my imagination and the story in my mind to control how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling. So in that situation, when the partner comes home and they are, you know, irritable, you would say, oh, how was your day? Did you have a bad day at work? What's going on? And then they can go, oh God, it was terrible. I'm so happy to be home with you right now. This sucked. Give me 5 minutes. I want to just go kind of lay down for a minute and just decompress. I'll be back and I'll tell you about it. And then you go, okay, great. And then everything's fine. And then you're actually there for them and you're supporting them, instead of creating some type of conflict. So the key is really recognizing the story, noticing the emotional reaction, stopping, allowing yourself to set those things aside by recognizing them for what they are, and then engaging with truth and facts by asking questions and actually clarifying what's going on in your life, as opposed to not asking any questions and just getting carried away by the story.
So you also talk about mindful communication, which I love. I mean, that's something that we talk about on this podcast quite a bit. Very important. I think you just touched on it just there, also about just being mindful kind of all the time, but particularly in the communication part of it. How do we go about that? What's your suggestion?
Yeah, there's a lot of really useful things we can do. I think one thing I tell people all the time is, take a breath before you speak. If you're in it's good in any conversation, but if you're in a conversation that's a little heightened, or one that might be a little more tense, or just meaningful, an important conversation of something deep, take a breath before you say something, because whenever you do that, you create a space, and that space, and it's a space of time. So that space gives you a moment to actually think about what you're saying. You think about what's happening instead of just reacting to what the person said. It gives you a moment to be thoughtful and respond with intentionality, as opposed to just being on this autopilot sort of reactive conversational thing. And that's a huge boon to any conversation, because generally we're just reacting. We're just they say this thing and then we react without thinking about it. And it's just whatever's coming out, we're just totally unmonitored and we're just on autopilot. But by taking that breath, you get a moment to actually reflect, to be thoughtful, and to speak intentionally. And that's really, really valuable. Another useful thing is to allow space in the conversation. Like whenever we get
what does that
into,
mean? Yeah. What does that mean?
like not feeling forced or compelled to have to continuously be talking the whole time. So allow each other to talk, allow a little bit of silence, allow both of you to just relax into the moment and be there with each other, as opposed to feeling like you have to just be interlocked in conversation the whole time and going back and forth. Again, what that does is that allows you to relax your body a little bit, because you're not tense, you're not trying to talk and you get into it. You both relax your bodies, and by doing that, you relax your mind, and by doing that, you're able to have a more calm and connected conversation, as opposed to just being like in this intense dance with each other.
Do you think that everyone is capable of getting here to this pure place?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, people might hear that and they'll say, well, not me. I'm one of the people that can't do that. And, there's a funny story that, since I've been I've been teaching meditation accidentally for years now. I've just been talking about
accidentally.
it.
What does that mean?
I never set out to like really teach it. What happens is that I just talk about it a lot, and then people came around and wanted to listen and started asking me questions. And so I talk about it, but I never set out to go, I'm going to be a meditation teacher. And I've never had any formal classes that I've taught or anything. I've had thousands and thousands of people ask me questions about meditation. And I think one of the best ones is that what I just mentioned about the person that says, oh, I could never slow down and have this mindful communication. It's the same train of thought as the person that says, I could never meditate. I'm just not the meditating type. And they say, well, I tried it one time. And what happened is I noticed that my mind was there was thoughts. It was crazy. It was just total static and noise. And I realized I can't do this. And I always tell this, I've heard that a million times. I always tell those people, you literally just had a breakthrough. So you saw your mind. You saw what was going on in there. That's the hardest part. Now it's just house cleaning. So now it's just, got the view of the untended garden. Now just go in there and do some weeding, So then it's just simple practice and consistency. So it's the same thing with this. It's like with this mindful communication. Once you try it one time and maybe it doesn't go great, but you're trying it, you do disrupt your normal patterns of communicating. That's the hardest part, is doing it. And then from there, it's just deepening it and learning yourself and the way to change your communication as you go forward in time.
So when you say that you think everyone can access it, do that, live their best life, there's the first step is they have to want that. Right. They have to, and they have to be able to let go to say, oh, I could never do that. Or this is just who I am. There's got to be a first layer of awareness, of desire. I mean, right.
Yeah, I think both. I think it's sort of like you're not going to accidentally become really muscular. You have to see that as a virtue, see like fitness as a virtue, and then go maybe watch some videos, read some books about the information. Then you go experiment. You actually get into the gym. You start figuring out like what exercises work for you. Then you get a routine going, and then you start building your own expertise, but in embodying the virtue that you saw in the first place that you desired to have in your life. This works the exact same way. Is you notice, maybe you hear us talking about it, or you observe it somewhere, and you go, God, I wish I could have that type of connection and that form of communication. And you go, well, let me go learn about that more. Let me go read some books. Let me go understand a little bit more deeply. And then let me try it out in my life. And then as you try it out, you learn how it works for you and how you can approach it. And then it becomes a part of who you are.
So right there, you're talking about getting curious, right? Having more curiosity. You talk about that in the book also. I think it's interesting. You bring it up in the book, and I would love for you to lean into this a little bit just here, is you talk about when you feel stuck, because a lot of people may hear us or even think about, yes, something's off, or I'm not quite where I want to be. And what you say is get curious. And someone might say, yeah, but I'm curious about what? And I love your response. I love your response in the book. Share,
Yeah,
if you can share. What do you do if you feel stuck?
Yeah, if you feel stuck, I mean, I don't. I mention that a lot of times, so I'd have to say I don't know exactly the precise
Which one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: if you're stuck and you feel like I can't get out of this, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. What's your advice for that?
I mean, I would say get curious about your curiosity. And really, that's what comes up for me is just start getting weird. Start thinking about like, oh, well, I'm not curious. I can't get curious. Well, what is curiosity? What is it? I don't know. I guess I'm looking at things differently. Well, what does that mean? Well, I guess I'll try and look at things differently and think about myself differently. Well, who am I? Like, oh, that's weird. I guess I'm this person that's projected this sense of identity and self on myself. And I suppose my surroundings have done that too. How interesting. Now you're thinking about how your environment's affecting how you think and how you feel. And you're beginning to realize that your sense of self is this thing that doesn't really even exist in the first place. You can go really far with it.
Right.
But to make it a bit more simplified, I think if someone has trouble, if they're feeling stuck and they have trouble finding their curiosity, I would say just break up the patterns of your behavior in your life. Start trying things, doing new things, reading things that you'd never reach for. Because really what we're trying to do here is just disrupt the familiar flow of the way that you're thinking and you're doing things. And it doesn't really matter how you mix up things. It's a matter of recognizing that there is more out there in the world than you're experiencing right now. And it's because we get so used to the groove of our life that becomes normalized and we think that's all there is. That's why we feel stuck, is because the patterns that we've lived, they just have happened to happen. Most of us don't really have this clear strategy of like, from 10 years old, I'm going to do these 100 things and become this. We're just figuring it out as we go along. And the external factors influence us. And also, we're not really paying attention. We're just trying to get through life and get food and figure out, who we can be and who we are. And we just kind of become this person. And since that happens so gradually, we assume, again, we go, oh, well, I guess this is what is, and this is who I am. But really, it's just what has happened to have happened. And the more that we see that, the more we can go, oh, wait a second. There's all sorts of possibilities. I can be all sorts of things. I can do all sorts of things. I don't have to stay labeled with this idea of self that has happened to emerge over time. And I think just exploring some of the differences, the things that you haven't allowed yourself or you haven't chosen to go into in life, is a good way to see and experience that there is newness out there. I mean, the best way to do it, I would say, is if you're in this thing and I feel stuck, I feel trapped in my own life, I feel kind of muted, go on a foreign vacation, like go to another country, because that's going to force you to think differently, to look at a different language, to talk to people differently, to move through the streets differently. Everything changes and you go, oh, wow, the world is a lot bigger and more rich than I've been thinking.
Yeah. And how little are my thoughts and how little am I in all of this, and how sort of meaningless or insignificant am I really? And then I get to design my own path and my own life. So once you get through and you get curious and you start to design your own path, and then you start having those same conversations that used to be the same old thing, but now you're this new person. How do you make sure you don't go back, or you don't, regress into maybe there was something you did want to leave behind that you don't want to go back to, and now you've done all this work and you feel really good about where you're at?
Yeah, I love that question. It's an important one too, because it's inevitable, and what will happen is that people will go back to old behaviors and those negative thinking habits start up again, and they say, oh yeah, well, who was I thought I could, change and whatever, but here I am again. I'm back in this. I'm eating, fried chicken sandwiches and not working out and watching terrible television, whatever. I'm miserable again. Sometimes what happens is that life moves in pulses. It moves in waves. We go through these periods of inspiration and excitement and energy. We also go through periods of being a little bit more low energy, a little bit less expansive, and just need to kind of regroup and stuff. And those are generally the times whenever we regress to older behaviors. What's useful though is that with the expanded sense of self-awareness and with the moving forward that you've done, whenever you slide back into those old behaviors, they become teaching tools, because you go, right, this is why I don't want to do this anymore. This is a good reminder. Let me step out of this again. And and we generally do that a couple of times with things that we try and leave behind. And eventually what happens is it becomes distasteful. So if there's this cheap pleasure or whatever it is that we keep going back to that's holding us back, then we're like, wait a second, this doesn't even feel good anymore. I don't like this. And so that you generally, kind of remind yourself enough to where it becomes something that you don't even desire to go back to at all.
You touched a little bit on meditation. How significant or important is meditation in all of this and redesigning your life?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's invaluable. I think that a person can do all of this stuff without it, certainly. But I would say that it is even the most simple form of meditation will have the most effective and direct results for doing a lot of the things that we're talking about, simply because it creates the spaciousness in your mind. It allows you to slow down and to get out of the momentum of reaction and anxiety that most of us are living in, this low level fight or flight anxiety. And by calming down, by being able to understand what we're thinking in the present moment with more clarity, we can then be more intentional in the present. And by making intentional choices, we can become who we want to be more directly.
What's your practice? What's your day like?
Yeah, my meditation is generally about 20 minutes and I go through different cycles of different approaches. Right now, I'm in a very, very clean, crisp, mechanical style right now, very dry, which would be closer to kind of more of a Zen meditation. So it's really simply just sitting, closing the eyes, breathing softly, relaxing the muscles in the body and face, and simply paying attention to the breath rising and falling. And that's all I'm doing, is just noticing the breath moving in and noticing it moving out and noticing moving in, and just training my attention on that for the time.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm one of those people that I believe it. I feel it when you say it. I don't have a great practice. I will for a little while and then I won't. And it's any suggestions to just make me stick to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really useful thing is inserting it in between other habits that you have in your day, like habit stacking.
Okay.
So generally people will look at it as this add-on thing where they go, okay, I want to meditate.
Good point. Yes.
And that's about the level of clarity that they have. But that goal has no direction, no form, no structure. So habit stacking, for anyone that's not familiar, is basically if there's a series of things you already do every day and you want to do something new, you insert the new habit in between those things. And what happens is that the thing that you do before you're going to do the new habit primes you to do it. And the thing that you would do after the new habit is a reminder if you forget to do it. So let's say that you wake up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite useful. Yeah. You can do it with anything. So let's say you wake up, you have coffee, you take a shower, you brush your teeth. Let's insert meditation after shower. So now you're going to go, you know what? I'm going to wake up, I'm going to have my coffee, I'm going to go take a shower, then I'll meditate, and then I'll brush my teeth and I'm out the door. Now you're inserting this in there. And so now you'll remember after you get out of the shower, like, oh yeah, I should be meditating right now. I should do that real quick for 5 minutes instead of brushing teeth and going out the door. And it wires the habit in the mind more quickly than just trying to have it, because otherwise you have a floating habit you're trying to insert somewhere. And what happens to floating habits?
And I just see that. That's exactly how it is. Right? It just floats around until I open the window and there it goes.
Totally. So it's a really useful way to do it. I would also say, like, lowering the stakes in your meditation is really useful, because people have this this idea of what it should be based upon, not on experience, but on what they've been told it should be and how they should do it. Once again, based off of their idea of how it should be as opposed to experience. So really just making it as simple with no expectations as possible. And what I always tell people is that if you meditate for 5 minutes, 5 times a week, just in the morning, 5 minutes in the morning, do that for 2 weeks, and then just start paying attention during your daily life. I wrote something recently that was, you earn your peace during meditation and you cash it in your daily life. Basically, you'll be in your life and you'll notice a moment where you might have normally reacted to something someone said. You might have had that reaction to the driver that cuts you off, but you have this half second of space in between your thinking and the reaction. And you go, oh, wait a second. There's a little bit of space there. I'm able to choose how I'm being in the world rather than just reacting to everything all the time. And that space just gets wider and wider the more that you meditate. It's really valuable.
So, Cory, we've talked about a lot of things today. I mean, mindful communication, perspective, assumptions, feeling stuck, all of this, meditation. For people who are listening who think, I do want to get started with something, I don't really know where to begin. I don't know exactly what I want, but I know that I want to shake it up a little bit. I know that some things don't feel good to me. Where would you tell them to begin?
I think I would probably suggest trying some meditation in the morning. I think trying that, because what that really does is that impacts the whole system. This is one of the reasons why I got so interested in all of the things that I got interested in whenever I was much younger, is because if we can change our consciousness, then we change our world. Because like we started talking at the beginning of this, if we change our mind, then how the world appears to us is different. So through meditation, what we're doing is we're really calming our consciousness. We're relaxing and clarifying our mind. And whenever we do that, we relax and clarify the world that we see. Not necessarily what's going on in it, but the way that we observe it. And by doing that, you'll see new opportunities. You'll start to see life differently. You'll feel differently. And that will lead to a natural, organic type of change, one that you might not have been able to get to or been able to access if you hadn't had that shift in mindset.
All right, Cory Allen, thank you so much. The book is Brave New You, and I will have a link to everything because you have wonderful assets online and Instagram and everything as well. And people definitely should hear more of you because you do speak truth and you do speak common sense. And why not? Why not make our lives better?
That's right. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
This podcast is for information only. It is in no way medical advice. As always, consult your doctor for medical advice.